Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. How transparent was Mr. Chidambaram's budget, or did it obscure more than it revealed? That's the key issue I shall discuss today with the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Mr. Ahluwalia, the Finance Minister began his budget speech by admitting the Indian economy is challenged. Why do you believe his budget is the right response to that challenge?
Well, because I think he made that very clear, that the biggest challenge right now is a huge macro imbalance, very large fiscal deficit, which is mirrored in the balance of payments by a large current account deficit. Now, if we want to get back in balance, not run the risk of running out of foreign inflows, it's important to reduce the fiscal deficit. And that big message the budget does have.
All right, let's look at specifics. The Finance Minister said at his afternoon press conference, the main message to the world is that the fiscal deficit will be contained. But has he actually and genuinely reduced last year's fiscal deficit to 5.2%, or has he merely deferred subsidy payment and tax refunds beyond April the 1st, thus doing it by optics, or what some people call sleight of hand?
You know, unless you go for what you would properly call an accrual system of budgeting, there's always some slip over. But by the same token, a lot of subsidies of the previous year got paid this year. I don't believe that the budget is in any sense distorted. It's quite possible that some of the subsidy payments due in the current year would be paid next year, but some of the subsidies due in the previous year were paid in the current year. So I don't think that makes a difference by itself.
What about something else? He's achieved his 5.2% target on the basis of savage expenditure cuts amounting to 92,000 crore of planned expenditure, or almost 18%. Now, that's clearly going to affect growth. And with quarter 3 coming in at 4.5%, many people feel this could push quarter 4 down close to 4%. That is self-inflicted, and it's a self-created problem.
No, I know there's a lot of people have been raising this with me, and I think as Deputy Chairman, I should clarify the position. It is not correct to say that expenditure was actually cut, in the sense that we took a conscious decision to reduce expenditure. What he has done is he's applied the existing rules very strictly. And the existing rules, in order to avoid a bunching of expenditure. You know, in the past, people used to delay preparing their schemes, then rush to prepare the schemes, try and get some money in the last month or so. There are rules that say that you can only spend a certain proportion of what you're going to spend for the year as a whole in the last 3 months. Now, using that, basically what has happened is slow expenditure in the first 9 months of the year has led to a lower expenditure for the year as well.
That explanation would be credible if the amount that has not been spent were less. In this instance, we're talking about almost 18% of planned expenditure amounting to 92,000 crore.
No,
surely your explanation can't account for such a whopping figure.
I would say that some of the strictness compared perhaps to a little bit of laxness earlier does amount to a slight change of rules. But the important thing is this. In the current year's budget, there was a big increase because we wanted to give a good start to the 12th plan. The fact is, ministries took too long to get their act together.
Let's move beyond the manner in which and the suspicions with which he's reduced last year's fiscal deficit to 5.2 to suspicions about his target for next year, where he says the fiscal deficit will be 4.8%. Now, he's projecting economic growth of about 6.4%, which people think is unlikely. He's hoping that tax revenues will increase by almost 19%, which people think is unrealistic. And he's projecting an increase in planned expenditure of almost 30%, which is whopping. Put all together, can you put all together then achieve a fiscal deficit target of 4.8%?
Well, look, let me say, as far as the planned expenditure is concerned, we want that increase compared to what happened last year. And the budget as a whole, the revenues and the planned expenditure, add up to giving you a deficit of 4.8. So the real question is revenue.
Actually, do they? Because that's what I'm going to question you on. There are 2 reasons why. In fact, the revenue on which this figure is based look unrealistic to begin with. He's anticipating a 33% increase in non-tax revenue amounting to some 43,000 crore. And he's expecting a 125% increase in disinvestment, including sales of other shares. Now, those are huge targets, which many people think he's not going to meet. And if he doesn't meet them, 4.8% goes straight out of the window.
No, but let's look at let's look at the revenue side. 6.5 roughly in real terms growth. Is that unreasonable? You know, in my view, the current year's growth rate is an absolute low. I mean, the CSO has projected it at about 5%. It could be a little bit higher by the time the numbers come out.
Or it could be a little bit lower, because if quarter 3 is 4.5,
Yeah.
and remember your expenditure cuts, which you're not calling cuts, you're just saying is foregone expenditure affects growth, then quarter 4 could come in closer to 4, which means your overall for the year will slip below 5 to maybe 4.8 or 4.7.
Not really, because, you know, a lot of this expenditure that gets bunched towards the end of the year doesn't actually get spent. It simply gets transferred to state governments and sits around in bank accounts. So that's not really true. The key thing is, I don't believe that starting at a low point, if you've taken the corrective steps needed to get rid of impediments to growth, projecting 6.5 next year is not too much. Let me explain why.
Don't explain why.
10-year record is 7.3% or 7.4%. So you're not even going back to the long-term growth.
You're hoping a 10-year track record continues and hasn't been discontinued. And on the basis of that hope, you're therefore saying that the revenue expectations will match up and allow and permit a 4.8% fiscal deficit. But let me point out another set of problems that question 4.8%. This budget is only assuming 65,000 crore as the petroleum subsidy, whereas last year's RE was 97,000 crore. So there's a drop of 32,000 crore amounting to 32%. Now, I put it to you that if on the basis of that you're going to achieve 4.8% fiscal deficit, you're either hoping for a sharp fall in oil prices, which is unlikely, or you're going to savagely cut expenditure once again next year as you did this year.
No, not at all, because on the petroleum subsidy, the most important thing is that about 2 months ago, the government introduced a gradual adjustment in diesel prices, 50 paise per litre per month. Now, if this adjustment is carried through, and obviously the budget assumes that will be carried through, and let me say it should be carried through, the entire petroleum subsidy on diesel would disappear within 16 months.
No.
So this year is going to show a lot of that.
In fact, it's not 16 months, because you're only increasing the diesel price by 45 paise a month. There's roughly something like a 10 rupees subsidy on diesel at the moment, and at that rate of decrease is going to take you 22 months. Now, you can't therefore assume that you're going to make up 32,000 crore worth of diesel subsidy in 1 year. You're not.
Look, let me put it this way. The total subsidy on diesel before all this started was 91,000 crores. If you're eliminating that in 18 months or even 19 months,
22
the saving, well, that, you know, the policy decision is about 50 paise. So if they're doing 45, they may take it to 50, it's up to them. The key point is the saving in getting rid of diesel is big. And I think that's a very important initiative which the government has taken. And if we stay with it, that will reflect itself in the fiscal deficit.
So the conclusion you're coming to is that if you stay within the diesel saving that you're anticipating and which you're saying you're committed to, then this diminishment of the oil subsidy of 92 down to 65 is understandable, and therefore the fiscal deficit of 4.8 can be achieved. That is, in a nutshell,
on this side,
the argument.
That's correct. I should add, by the way, that not all the diesel subsidy was actually being paid out of the budget. Part of that under-recovery was borne by the companies themselves.
Okay.
So the impact on the budget could be very substantial.
So the bottom line is 4.8%, despite all the questions I've thrown at you and despite all the doubt in the market, is a credible figure for next year.
It's an achievable figure. Look, numbers can change, and you adjust other things accordingly.
Well, let me now bring up another reason why, in fact, it may not be achievable, and I'm now switching to talk about growth. Quarter 3 brought in growth at 4.5%. I'm suggesting to you, and many in the market believe that quarter 4 could see growth come even below that. Therefore, the annual growth may not be 5%, as the CSO said, but just 4.8%. Now, to go from that to growth of 6.4%, which is what this budget assumes, is a jump of almost 2%. Is it credible?
It is credible in 1 year. By the way, we have in the past had a jump year to year of that order of magnitude. I agree with you.
It was miraculous when it happened. Are you hoping for a second miracle again?
No, it wasn't necessarily miraculous. It was the impact of cumulative changes that were being made in policy.
Can I tell you why this time round it may not be possible to achieve another 2% jump in growth? Because if you end up as many people suspect, I know you don't agree, but if you end up, as many people suspect, having to achieve 4.8% fiscal deficit through savage foregoing, if not cutting of expenditure, then that will impact on growth. And once again, there'll be question marks about achieving growth of 6%, leave aside 6.7.
No, I don't. You know, we must be very clear about one thing. Is the growth strategy dependent on government spending money? In which case, what you're really saying is that the fiscal deficit reduction strategy is fundamentally inconsistent with growth. That is a worthwhile thing to argue. I don't happen to agree with it. The reason I don't agree with it is that the restraint on government expenditure has to be offset by a big increase in private investment and public sector investment, which is not in the budget.
And if
that happens, growth will take place.
And that's another reason why actually people are concerned and questioning this 6.4% growth figure. Because as you've said repeatedly in interviews to me, the real obstacle to growth is not the absence of government expenditure, but the fact that so many projects are stalled because they're in shortage of clearance. One clearance or another is holding them up. Now, the problem is that analysts say that perhaps the quantum of projects that are stalled amounts to some 700,000 lakh crore. But the finance has done or suggested very little which will speed up that clearance and boost growth. That private sector investment that could replace government spending is not going to happen.
That's a very distorted presentation, because it is true that in the budget speech, he didn't announce anything specific. But what he did say was, this is something we've been worried about for the last 3 months. We already took the steps necessary in the form of setting up a cabinet committee on investment.
3 months ago, and that cabinet committee has not delivered anything to date.
No, that's not correct, by the way. It was announced 3 months ago. It was notified in January. It has met twice. And
but it's still done nothing.
No, that's also not true. And you'll see from his speech, it has met, it has taken some decisions. Some issues have been referred for resolution to particular groups to come back. I'm very confident that, let's say in a month from now, one will be able to say, as a result of this effort, these are the projects that got cleared.
I'll tell you why I question your confidence, because when I interviewed you, virtually on the same date last year, after last year's budget, you said to me that within 4 or 5 months, stalled projects in coal, power, and steel would be pushed through, because those infrastructure bottlenecks which you'd recognize would be removed. A year later, we're still talking about removing them, but the bottlenecks are there.
I agree with you that a year ago, it was my expectation, I think the government's also, that when you identified a problem, the system ought to be able to get things moving. Unfortunately, the system was clogged up. That's why you needed a cabinet committee on investment, which is empowered to take these decisions.
Right.
We didn't have that then.
At least you're being honest in saying that your perception that once you identify a problem, the system will clear it up was based on a confidence that was not realized. Now you need to actually push the system, and the CCI will push the system.
But I sincerely hope so.
You mean there's still doubt in your mind?
No, I mean, whenever you're looking forward, you should express your hope how it will work. I'm very confident that they will succeed. And that's what I meant, that we now have the instrument.
Let me put it like this. Many industrialists look at the Indian manufacturing scene, which is clearly in the doldrums, and they say something was needed decisively to be said or done that would lift sentiment, that would boost animal spirits. And beyond giving them an investment allowance of 15%, they can't see very much, and they're disappointed. This was a moment to fire them with hope and confidence for the future, and he hasn't done so.
I don't agree with that. By the way, the investment allowance is quite a major step. It incentivizes people. It's there for 2 years, so it incentivizes them to do something. It's a mistake, in my view, to think that when animal spirits are down, you need a tax incentive. You need to know, why are animal spirits down? If animal spirits are down because projects aren't moving, clearances aren't being given, or because of global financial constraints, money isn't flowing, you've got to address that issue directly.
And what you're going to do in terms of bottlenecks to projects is going to do that for you.
That plus what we're trying to do on the financial side, opening up avenues where money can come in. And by the way, the reduction in the fiscal deficit, if it is achieved, will actually release a lot of money in the system. That will put more money into these projects.
Let's then take a break at that point and come back and talk about the financial side. And in particular, let's talk about FDI, which the finance minister said was an imperative. But has he done or said enough to encourage it? Or once again, is it more talk and less action? That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Mr. Ahluwalia, the Finance Minister said that foreign investment is an imperative, and he frankly revealed that India needs $75 billion a year for 2 years to finance our current account deficit. Has he done or said enough to encourage that quantum of foreign investment to come in?
I think so, actually. I mean, look, there are a lot of things that he's done. First, there were some uncertainties in the minds of foreign investors as a result of last year's budget.
You mean GAR?
GAR and all that concern. I think he's quite categorically put that aside. GAR is only going to come in April 1, 2016. There'll be enough time between now and then to clarify things. He's already done some clarification. So I think those who feared that this was anti-foreign investment or anti-legitimate foreign investment, they should be satisfied.
I fully accept that when it comes to GAR, he's actually removed doubts, or at least he's pushed them 3 years down the road, which is so far away that people don't worry about them today. But those weren't the only doubts that were clouding foreign investment. There were concerns about retrospective tax amendments centered around Vodafone, but it affects other companies as well. And those are still unresolved, despite the fact the Parthasarathi Shom Committee gave its report 3 or 4 months ago. And now, many people believe, after hearing the budget on Thursday, that the finance minister has created new doubts and uncertainties about the Mauritius route of investment, which after all brings in 40% investment. So I put it to you, far from clarifying and removing doubts, he might have ended up muddying the water further still.
I don't think so, actually, because I think nothing that he said on Mauritius should be a matter of concern for any of what we would call the legitimate FII investments which come via Mauritius, where as long as they get a tax residency certificate, nobody's going to question that they are indeed coming from Mauritius. And I think that $40 billion is all that.
He's actually raised a different point. The tax residency will only establish where they're residents of. They need to have another certificate that proves that they're the beneficiaries, the rightful beneficiaries, and that the tax residency certificate is not sufficient for that. Now that, because you know and I know, many of the investors actually use Mauritius as a post office account.
No, but
right?
I think
might put them off.
I think this is the kind of technical issue which takes me beyond my competence. So if there is any doubt, my own view is this. If there's any doubt in anyone's minds that a bona fide FII, obviously bringing in money from investors abroad, investing through the Mauritius route is going to benefit from the treaty, they should raise that issue, and I sincerely hope that the finance minister will clarify.
Now, you're very reassuring when you say that, and no doubt foreign investors hearing this interview will take reassurance from what you said. But on the other hand, other members of the cabinet, like the law minister, in an interview on Thursday immediately after the budget, when he was questioned, said, no, he says, there is a clear and unambiguous message to foreign investors. Now, if that's the line the law minister takes, then it sounds to many as if he's not even ready to accept that there are doubts created that need to be addressed. And what we need to do is to say, we will address the doubts.
He's only saying, and I think I'm glad he said that, because it must be the case that the clear message that he was referring to was a message of welcome. Now, if there, in tax matters, some accountant can always find some little something there which raises doubts in their mind. I think the finance minister probably will clarify those doubts when the finance bill is debated.
My last question to you, and it's about reforms. No doubt the finance minister has indicated that the DC bill will be introduced in Parliament before the end of the budget session. But he set out no roadmap for GST. He didn't say a word about pension insurance, which have been stuck in Parliament for years, not a word about land acquisition, for which industry is anxiously waiting. So are those reforms now pushed onto the back burner?
Well, no, let me on the GST, I thought he made a very strong statement. He more or less invited the opposition parties, who are, after all, in state governments, to come forth and cooperate with the government to make GST a reality.
Okay.
I believe that the way those discussions have gone, there is an understanding with the opposition, on the part of the opposition, that GST is in India's interest. Now, this is also politics. This is a constitutional amendment. Nobody can force the pace. I read his statement, and the fact that nobody has actually refuted that issue, that GST is going to happen. It may not become operative in the year 2013. That's a profound disappointment for me. But you know, if you're looking at India ahead, if an analyst were to come to the conclusion, it looks like GST is going to be in, but a year later, I think that they would give a lot of positive marks.
In other words, you're saying the market should look at the glass and say it's half full, not half empty.
Well, it may be 3/4 full in this case, actually.
Okay. On that note, which is positive, I thank you very much for this interview.
Thanks, Karan.